Before we begin the panel, I'd like to invite you to attend our other exciting events planned for this week. This evening at 7 p.m. in the Open Union Ballroom, Issa Davis will perform Angela's Mixtape. This event is at 7 p.m. and it will be a performance of musical montage of Issa Davis and University of Utah students. Issa Davis is the niece of Angela Davis, and she'll explore her experiences of growing up as Angela Davis's niece in Berkeley, California. Tomorrow afternoon at noon in the Open Union Ballroom, Angela Davis will be our keynote speaker. Dr. Davis will interrogate the status of civil and human rights. On Friday, we have the honor of having Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum here in the Open Solitaire Room at 3 p.m. Dr. Tatum will present a special lecture on contemporary issues of race relations in Friday at 7 p.m. in the Open Union Theater. We'll have our feature film, American Blackout. On KUED Utah Now, Doug Fabrizio will be interviewing Angela Davis on Friday at 8:30 on KUED Channel 7. On Saturday, January 13th, at 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Northwest Multipurpose Center, we will have our community service project, Diabetes Awareness. And last but not least, on Monday, January 15th at 6:30 p.m. at Libby Gardner Hall, Guapale will perform. She is a multifaceted artist and songwriter known as much for her social and political activism as for her lush romantic ballads. In addition, on that evening at the beginning of our event, we will be honoring the Youth Leadership Award recipients. The Guapale performance will be free and open to the public, but tickets are required and they can be picked up at the Kingsbury Hall ticket office or online at www.kingsbury.utah.edu. In addition, Leo Leckie has asked me to remind you that we have beautiful posters for this event on the back table if you'd like to take one home with you. I'd also like to acknowledge our courageous leader, Vice President Karen Days. Dr. Days has chaired the Martin Luther King Jr. Committee for the past 8 years, and under her leadership, the University of Utah has had some of the most exciting and thought-provoking events in our community. We appreciate her sincere support, direction, and vision. Her ability to organize events that move beyond simple celebration to real conversations about our community today, tomorrow, and in the future is tremendous. In addition, Dr. Days has never swayed away from difficult conversations and has supported turning the microscope inward to examine our own participation in institutionalized racism, colonization, and oppression. Dr. Days, thank you for your efforts and good luck with your new position at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. They are very lucky, and we will miss your unshakable vision of what diversity can really be.
Yes, we will.
I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's panel. Dr. Broderick Black is an assistant professor in the Department of Education, Culture, and Society and the Ethnic Studies program. He is a graduate of the University of Illinois from the Department of Educational Policy Studies with an emphasis in sociology of education. His research interests include, but are not limited to, graduate student socialization, critical race theory, and the utilization of hip-hop as a form of resistance and critical pedagogy, in which he has published in each respective area.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I need energy. I know it's early for some folk. Back to City Frank. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Department of Diversity, Associate Vice President of Diversity, their whole office working that organizing such a panel, and Louise Brooks, as well as also thank Chris Lee for organizing this panel for us today. It has been my duty to introduce the panel that we have before us, but before I do that, I do have a little spiel of myself to talk about regarding Dr. Martin Luther King. Nearly 39 years ago, one of America's most celebrated patriots was assassinated. It's not often we associate the word patriot with the good Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. However, I think he's probably one of the truest of true patriots of this country's past, present, and future, because he strongly believed that America, as a social organism, had the capacity to live in practice what is spoke in principle. And those principles being, as we know what's being said in our grade schools on a day-to-day basis, the one nation under God, which means that, it is one nation being so blessed by God. Indivisible, right? The incapable of being divided, which we see oftentimes is not necessarily the case. So he strongly believed that we can't actually live within these principles without being so divided, which I think our panel will actually get to at a later date or a later time within our hour. With liberty, which is the freedom, the right of power to live one's own life without threats, without fear, or some sort of retaliation based on the way one wants to live or chooses to live. And also injustice. He was very famous for saying that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. And the principle of justice is more or less the quality of dealing fairly with others, giving everyone a fresh shot, right? And then also the most important one is for all. Needless to say, that's self-explanatory. 39 years later, after the fallen patriot, we still find ourselves fighting the same battle and barely treading water to stay afloat. Thus today, we have assembled a great panel of University of Utah scholars to speak more to the issues of treading water and the civil and human rights that have been gained, as well as repealed, and also the impediments that we have to maintain against those particular rights. First and foremost, and I don't think this is in any particular order in terms of how we're going to speak, but I think they have to align themselves in which they choose to speak. Starting with Dr. Ricky Alman. He's a native of South Texas, has an undergraduate degree from St. Mary's University, San Antonio, Texas, a master's degree from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs in New York, and completed his PhD in Education Administration from the University of Texas at Austin. While at UT, he also completed a doctoral certification in Mexican American Studies. His research agenda includes studying the effects of educational policy on Latino, and Chicano students and communities. In August 2004, he began as an assistant professor in the Department of Education, Leadership, and Policy at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. Dr. Enrique Alman. Next to Dr. Alman, we have Professor Peyton Yen. I've practiced that quite a bit just so I wouldn't mess it up. Peyton Yen is Associate Professor of Political Science and Ethnic Studies. She has been with the U since 1995. Her primary research interest is the political participation of Asian and other non-white Americans. She is the author of the award-winning book, The Making of Asian America Through Political Participation, published through Temple Press in 2001. In addition, she also authored 2 other books and numerous other publications. Dr. Peyton Yen. Next to Dr. Yen, we have Professor Elizabeth Clement. She received her BA in History and Women's Study at Columbia University of New York. She then went to the University of Penn, earning a master's and PhD in History and a graduate certificate in Women's Study. Her book, which was published this June by the University of Carolina Press, is titled Love for Sale, Courting Couples, Charity Girls, and Sex Workers in the Making of Modern Heterosexuality in New York City from 1900 to 1945. And she focuses on how American understanding of relationships between sexual activity and morality have changed over time. Dr. Clement. And last but not least, we have Dr. William A. Smith, which shake your head for. soon to be newly minted associate professor. In the Department of, hold your breath, right? In the Department of Education, Culture, Society, and Ethnic Studies program at the University of Utah. Like myself, but before me, he received his PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where his research and training was in the areas of educational policy analysis and educational sociology, social psychology with emphasis in higher education. Since his arrival in Salt Lake City, he has published his highly regarded book, The Racial Crisis in American Higher Education, The Continuing Challenges for the 21st Century. Dr. Smith. The way that we're going to plan to do this is that each panelist would have about maybe 10 to 15 minutes to talk about their research. We'll save questions toward the end, and at that point we can entertain questions from the audience.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Land, and special thanks to Dr. Dace and to Christy Rugen for offering or giving this opportunity to me to speak today. Just give us a few of my thoughts on issues of immigration and a little bit on education, since that's what I study and that's what I teach about and research about on a daily basis. Just having returned from wearing shorts for 2 weeks in South Texas, golfing, enjoying barbecuing. It's nice to be back in Utah, welcoming this. I guess we're supposed to get below freezing weather here, or below zero weather here pretty soon. I was thinking a lot about this presentation and this talk while visiting family and relatives and friends back in South Texas. I grew up about an hour and a half from the U.S., the Texas-Mexican border, and a lot of my family is on the border, which is called the Valley of South Texas. And having conversations with uncles and aunts about this issue of immigration. And so when I looked at the topic, or the title of this talk, Treading Water, the Recent Setbacks on Civil and Human Rights, as an academic and as a scholar, you begin to ask questions. Are we really treading water? Have there been recent setbacks in this fight? And it was really interesting to talk to my family who, my dad and my mom both come from migrant farm working families. They're both from South Texas. They did the Midwest route. My dad's family did the Midwest route, did a lot of vegetables and cotton and fruits. My mom's family stayed within Texas and did a lot of northern panhandle cotton route. So all my uncles and aunts had that real world experience of growing up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s of overt racism and overt discrimination. So when I talked to my uncles and aunts about immigration, it was really troubling to hear them talk about how there is an illegal problem. There's a problem with illegals. They're coming across to have babies. The reason they're coming here is for breaking the law. This is coming from people who came from that era, and people who are very proud of their heritage and their background. And so when I asked the question, are we treading water in this issue of immigration, my answer would have to be yes, and treading and barely keeping our heads above water. I want to give a few examples of how that's happening. And what's happened, I think, in my estimation, is that there's been an increase in criminalization of undocumented persons and of immigrants. It's now being framed as a national security issue, especially after 9/11, when the heightened security has now been to look south of the border, to look at let's build a border fence. Let's begin to debate this issue more as in order to keep our security, we have to do these types of things. And so when you look back at history, it's very similar. When you look at the Utah Minutemen, this organization of people who have taken up arms on the border here in Utah to fight against this so-called illegal immigration problem. It's very similar to what happened in South Texas with the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers have this great the perception out there that they have a long history of law enforcement, but really the history of the Texas Rangers has always been border security. It's been a security issue. They were hired by ranchers and by farmers in South Texas to wipe out that segment of society. And in some estimations by a lot of scholars who've written about this, to steal land and to co-opt the whole area. And so the criminalization of undocumented immigrants has been done in ways, it's been framed as a national security issue, but also with the border fence, which is legislation that passed in the last couple of months, in which a lot of Democrats did support, including front-runner Hillary Rodham Clinton. Recently here in Utah, we've had raids, as well as nationally in Hiram, Utah, in which here in Utah there's been over 100 mothers, fathers, daughters, friends, relatives who've been corralled and put into detention centers. It's been really a part of a concerted effort, not only by law enforcement officials, but people in the media. It's not only Fox News, you can turn on CNN, it's on daily with Lou Dobbs. You watch that 30 minutes of xenophobic and racism that continues to be shown over our airwaves. It's no surprise that the level of fear, the level of ignorance is within even our own communities. When I sat and talked to my DIA about what she thought about this issue. I want to give you just a couple of examples, just some numbers here, from a UPI story in December, in which, I'll just quote this real quick, U.S. immigration officials removed more than 4,500 illegal immigrants from the country in the past 2 weeks, in one of the largest deportations of the year. The Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Julie Myers said 1,400 of those deported had criminal records. She said, quote, apprehending, detaining, and removing criminal and other illegal aliens promotes public safety and protects the integrity of the immigration system. So again, it's being framed as national security. We have to be really scared of those people who are basically walking across the desert, and a lot of them coming with their families, a lot of them coming with their children. But that's what we need to be scared of. That's how we're going to secure this country, by building a border fence. This story also cites some numbers in fiscal 2006. ICE officials removed more than 186,600 illegal immigrants from the United States, a record for the agency, and an increase of 10% over the last year. So clearly, the deportations are on the rise. The number of citizens that are out there that have been contributing to this country, that have been contributing to our community, to the state, are going to be under continued suspicion. Two more articles real quick, and Roderick will let me know where I'm at, 5 minutes. In February of 2006, it was really interesting. A New York Times article cites how the Army Corps of Engineers had just awarded a contract of up to $385 million for building temporary immigration detention centers to Kellogg, Brown, and Root, which, as we all know, is a Halliburton subsidiary. And so these detention centers have been going up, and there's a couple of them, I know one of them for sure, outside of Austin, Texas, in which families are now being housed, along with children, in detention centers run by private companies that have also got contracts in other parts of the world. And so that's from the New York Times article in February. In December of this year, February of last year, 2006, in December, the Austin editorial board mentioned this Austin Detention Center and had access, was able to get access, even though the private facility didn't have to let them in. They got access in some way, and talked about how this private facility in Taylor, which is a small community outside of Austin, along with a smaller one in Pennsylvania, was doing things like children of those apprehended are dressed in prison jumpsuits and receive only 1 hour of schooling and 1 hour of recreation a day. Not to mention that many of these children are U.S.-born citizens. Hard information on the program in the private prison is difficult to come by. The company running the prison refers questions to the immigration office, and the immigration office has little to say about the situation. And so more and more these instances of not only so-called illegal immigrants are being targeted, but what you're finding is people who are born here, people who are U.S.-born citizens, are next in line. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the legislation that has been creeping up here, especially in Utah. You know, we've had by certain legislators that are trying to repeal the in-state tuition for undocumented students, even if, and for those who don't know about that, for those students who've grown up here or lived here at least 3 years in the state of Utah, they abide by all the rules, they meet all the admissions requirements, they pass all their classes in high school and gain admittance into the state university, can, under current law, get in-state tuition. Well, there's a move to repeal that, and it looks like it's gonna get a lot of attention again this year. And so there's legislation like that in the state, but there's also legislation around the country that has been cropping up in city governments and county governments, in which there's a move to monitor and to investigate how people rent out apartments or how they get loans, to monitor who is able to get access to that. And that's another form of how this criminalization of undocumented immigrants has been on the increase. A historically inconvenient truth, to borrow a phrase from the former Vice President of the United States, that is being overlooked really is when it is convenient for the United States to benefit from countries south of the border, then immigration has not been that big of a concern. However, when it is, then it becomes a problem. I talked to my dad again back on my trip, and it was really interesting to sit. I started getting oral histories from people in my family. I just think it's a really important issue when a lot of your history is not in the textbooks, when a lot of your history is not taught in the schools, to sit and talk to your relatives, to sit and talk to people who've been around and get their experiences. And talking with him, I hadn't realized that my grandfather, who became a naturalized U.S. citizen when he was 88, and unfortunately, in my estimation, voted for George H.W. Bush the first time around. It was interesting the fact that he was here, documented citizen, and was working on the Bracero program in the 1950s and 60s. He was responsible for being a foreman with a lot of workers who were brought to the U.S. specifically to work in agriculture. And so he was the middleman between, at least he understood English and could read English. He didn't speak it very well, but he could communicate with the ranchers and the farmers in the Midwest. And so he's a middleman in that situation. That speaks to the history of when it's good for our country to let people in and to get what we need out of them. When it's not good for our country, when it's framed as a national security issue, then it becomes a problem. It's nothing that has really changed, and so I don't really see this as a recent setback. I just see it as part of a continuing legacy of our hypocrisy and of our racism. Finally, 1 minute. I just want to briefly talk about, ask another question of how would Dr. King address this issue of immigration if he were alive today. And so, I would argue that he would be on the side of immigrants. He would be on the side of undocumented persons and of progressive Latino and Chicano leaders, not only in the state but in the country. I think he would stress the opportunities for political mobilization and for coalition building. There's a lot of issues here within communities of color that could be used as a method for organizing and for building coalitions. I think he would look at the rallies and the marches that happened in the spring, whereas we had 40,000 or so people marching the streets of Salt Lake, as a very positive thing, as a way to engage youth, as a way to engage multiple communities to come together and to look at these issues critically. And finally, I think he would frame this issue as a human rights issue. It wouldn't be framed as a civil rights issue. He would look at the fact that people are crossing the desert, they're climbing into the backs of trucks, and they're dying of suffocation and of thirst. More and more of those who are coming to pick our fruit. They're coming to build our houses and they're cleaning our hotel rooms. They're coming to work in our meat and chicken packing industries and they're bringing their children. Many are dying or being maimed on the trains or on their treks from Central America. He would say that this is the issue. This country benefits. We become wealthier. We live better off the backs of those from Mexico and from other countries in the South. Dr. King would call it what it is, and he would call on America's so-called leaders on their racism and on their hypocrisy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Days and Christy, for organizing the panel, for the invitation, and for everybody to come in at the very beginning of the year for this very exciting panel. Alright. I would like to address this year's theme, Civil Rights Postponed, from the angle of voting rights. Specifically, I want to talk about whose rights were postponed, under what condition, and for what reason were they postponed, and what actions to take to remedy the problems at the dawn of the 21st century. And I know that I'm only one of the many teachers and scholars who do research and teach on the issue of voting rights, specifically from the minorities' perspective, broadly defined. And so I'm very honored to be able to give it a take from my personal perspective. Even though the ability to base the right to vote on race was abolished over 135 years ago with the passage of the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and even after the signing of the historic Voting Rights Act of 1965 by President Lyndon Johnson, minority voters continue to experience a disproportionately high level of voter intimidation and disenfranchisement. You may be familiar with the stories reported in the media, including mainstream media, of the voting irregularities in the 2000 and 2004 presidential elections in Florida and in Ohio. Horror stories such as heavily minority voting districts being plastered with flyers and leaflets that include misinformation about election day and outright lies about election policies, such as flyers telling voters, Republican voters, to vote on one day and Democrats to vote on the other day. Others reminding voters to pay all the outstanding parking tickets and child support, or they could be thrown in jail or have his or her child taken away. And this, I would like to give a plug actually to the film that are going to be shown on Friday. This is among the nation's first showing, I will publish showing of American Blackout. The film actually is about all these election stories, particularly from a perspective of a black Congresswoman from Georgia, McKinney. So I thought more stories can be told there. Here, let me actually also tell something about what happened in 2006. That is the election that we started to have new voting machines. And because of that, we have stories of equipment failures, inadequate poll workers training, insufficient number of poll workers to offer language assistance, which has been a regular problem, but again was also emerged in 2006, and unsecured e-voting machines that could be hacked easily, and excessive long waiting times due to a shortage of polling stations and due to the shortage of money to buy machines, particularly in locations where the racial and language minority population tend to be high. So voting rights issues are important for every American, but they are particularly important for minority Americans. And here, let me point out to some other and more fundamental challenges to the full franchise. This is now, according to my own analysis of the latest government statistics on voting in the 2000 November elections. Non-Hispanic white voters or Anglo voters voted at the rate of 66%, which is 9 percentage points more than the 57% voting rates of African Americans or blacks. 11 percentage points more than the 55 voting rates of American Indians. 23 percentage points more than the 43% of voting rates for Native Americans and other Pacific Islanders. And then 35 percentage points more than the 31% voting rates of Asian Americans. And last but not least, 38 percentage points more than the 28% voting rates of Hispanic American or Latinos. Are these news to you? Yes, you heard it right. Of the more than 27 million voting age Latinos, only 28% voted in the 2004 presidential election. Of the close to 1 million voting age Asian Americans, only 31% voted in the same election. And of all the non-white Americans, only blacks had a slim majority of the voting age population voted in the most recent presidential election. The lack of political participation in the electoral process and full access to the franchise continue to plague the U.S. democracy and is an issue for all Americans in the present day. However, the gaps in voting are more severe for non-white Americans and more so for the racial and ethnic groups that are not non-native born or black. A peek into the percentage of the foreign-born population and citizenship rates give us some good idea of the source of the voting gaps for non-black minority Americans. Among the voting age population, as high as 78% of Asian Americans and 57% of Latinos, as well as 35% of Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders or other Pacific Islanders who were foreign-born and not U.S. citizenship by birth. Among the foreign-born adults, 4 out of 10 Asians and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders, as well as more than 7 out of 10 Latinos did not possess U.S. citizenship. After accounting for the barriers of citizenship and voter registration, which is actually a self-voluntary act, our government doesn't do it for us, unlike most of the other governments, other democracies. Okay, here, blacks and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders were able to vote at a rate of 88%, or somewhat close to, actually only 1 percentage point lower than the rate for non-Hispanic whites. So this is about an equal rate of participation after we take into account the barriers of age, of citizenship, and of voting registration. The voting right rate for registered Asian Americans were 4 percentage points below, and therefore Latinos and American Indians were 7 percentage points below that for non-Hispanic white voters. So thus, in addition to all the problems I mentioned, being paid attention mostly by the media about the need to address mounting voter intimidation and voter fraud issues, which tend to focus on problems pestering the black community and to some extent the American Indian community and also Hispanic American community. We need to establish clear and uniform electoral policies and guidelines that help the election workers to help administer the elections to the extent guided by our law. And also we also need to address the basic needs, especially in communities with higher proportions of the foreign-born population, for systematic, long-term efforts in citizenship drives, in voter education, and in turnout campaigns. And only with this widespread and long-term and persistent efforts can we start to begin to hope for, to deliver the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. about a vote for all Americans, an equal vote for all Americans. Thank you.
My name is Elizabeth Clement. I'm in the history department here at the University of Utah. I'm also affiliated with Gender Studies. I'd like to thank you for coming out on what is for me the first day of the semester. I know that's a hardship. And I've been asked to talk about civil rights in the context of gay and lesbian rights. both in the United States generally and also locally, because of course we are a hotbed for these issues. But like the other panelists before me, before I do that, I want to comment a little bit on Martin Luther King and the issue of civil rights more generally. As many of you probably know from having watched Schoolhouse Rock or perhaps simply taken an American history class, the Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and okay, to be fair, they meant white men of a certain socioeconomic class, but anyway, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creators with certain inalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, like most of us, Dr. King read that, and in his speech, in the nation's capital at the March on Washington, the less famous part of the speech, the I Have a Dream speech, commented that America had issued a blank check, particularly to its African American citizens, but also to many other citizens as well. And I think to me that is the meaning and the promise of Martin Luther King, that America has wonderful values that it has written down in many of its founding documents, that it has gradually expanded. So, you know, that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, in the 1860s, with the 14th and 15th Amendment, African American men were briefly included in that. And in 1920, white women were briefly included in that with the passage of the suffrage, but because blacks couldn't vote in the South, most black women didn't get to do that. But American history, for me, as a historian, is a sort of stuttering expansion of the rights and promises that America has made to its citizens, and also an expansion of who those citizens might be. So I think it would be very easy to say that at the time Jefferson wrote those words, African Americans were not actually really considered citizens, they were property. Women were not actually considered citizens, they were also property, actually. And many other people were not. And so you see over the course of American history a fight, and it is a fight. It's not something that happens gradually. It's not something that happens automatically. It's not something that happens if you don't show up and vote. To have these rights and these privileges and these promises extended to what most of us do consider to be the citizenship of the United States, the people who live here, the people who work here, our neighbors and our friends. And so I think King would say, on issues of immigration, on issues of voting, and in my case on issues of gay and lesbian, civil and family rights, that we are not treading water, we are actually going backwards. Things are getting worse. And that is certainly true for gays and lesbians in the state of Utah, and it is true for gays and lesbians nationally. So what I want to do is just give you an overview of what's been happening legally around issues particularly pertaining to marriage and family. Because those are the issues right now that most of the activism on both sides is occurring in the gay and lesbian community and in the folks who are attempting to deny basic family rights to that community. And I'm going to move back and forth between Utah and the national scene, because there's stuff going on in Utah that is not necessarily going on nationally, and vice versa. So to start, in the year 2000, which was a year after I showed up for my job as an assistant professor here at the University of Utah, the Utah legislature banned the adoption and foster care for gays and lesbians, although actually what they did, and they intended it as a very smart way, they did not actually write it in a discriminatory way. What they did is they said that no one who is, okay, bear with me now, this is complicated, no one who is a single, cohabiting, sexually involved adult may adopt or foster children in the state of Utah. Okay, we all know that this was largely aimed at gays and lesbians, right? You have your little gay male couple, they've been together for 5 years, they decide they'd like to adopt a baby. No, can't do that. But it was written in this sort of non-discriminatory language, and which meant that, for example, if you were a single if you were a heterosexual person who had a partner but did not want to get married, you also would not be able to adopt or foster under this statute, right? So they're tying this issue to the issue of marriage. Now, obviously, this ban has effects on gay families, and that was its intent. I think the main intent of the legislature, to be honest, was that they did not want children, particularly children in the state's care, that is to say foster children, children that the state is responsible for, to be adopted into gay and lesbian families. Because they didn't like gay and lesbian families, and they didn't like gays and lesbians, and they thought that they were bad for children. Now, there's an enormous amount of evidence that that is not true. Tons of research on this. Most of the major child welfare organizations, the American Academy of Pediatrics, have all come out and said there is no research to support this. But okay, so that was their opinion. It has had other effects as well. Perhaps the most important for the gay and lesbian community is that it has meant that gays and lesbians can no longer do what's called second parent or co-parent adoption. Okay, what's that? Well, practically speaking, I'll be honest with you guys, I'm pregnant now. I'm due in April. Okay? My partner and I planned this child together, and my partner cannot adopt this child because adoption is banned in the state of Utah. Before 2000, my partner could have adopted this child. Would have been unpleasant and time-consuming. We would have had to go to court, but it could have happened. So, practically speaking, I am going to have to go to the state of California with my family. My partner and I are going to have to take leave of absence from our work. The University of Utah will not have the benefit of our fabulous services. Y'all will not be able to take classes with me. And we will have to establish residency in California or New York or some other state which continues to allow gay adoption. For my partner to establish a legal relationship to our child, what we planned and had together. And there are lots of reasons why this is important, most of which has to do with the welfare of our child, not with my welfare or my partner's welfare. So for example, if my partner dies before we are able to do this, my child will be unable to collect Social Security from her, which she would be able to do if my partner was allowed to adopt this child. So there are very real financial problems associated with the denial of family rights to gays and lesbians. The other thing that this ban does is it actually denies or restricts the rights of straight families to name guardians for their children. So for example, if my sister and her husband died, and they wanted me to take care of their child, which actually in our family would be the most logical choice for them, they would be unable to do that in the state of Utah. They could not name me as a guardian because of my sexual orientation, even though maybe I have the closest relationship to that child. So it limits not only rights of gays and lesbians, but also rights of straight people, which I always find is useful in trying to explain why y'all should be upset about certain things that don't necessarily affect you, but you know. Okay, so Utah has a ban on gay adoption. There are two other states that I know of, Texas and Florida, that have similar bans as well. Both passed, as far as I can tell, maybe not Florida. Texas was definitely passed after we passed our ban. And what's amazing about that is that's a step backwards, right? It didn't used to be banned, it's banned now. Okay, the gay marriage thing. I know that's why I'm here. I'm supposed to talk about the gay marriage thing. And what I wanted to do is to give you a little bit of background on how Massachusetts made its decision, the Supreme Court of Massachusetts, and how it's related to other kinds of civil rights law. Because I know most of you probably understand that marriage comes with it marriage brings with it a number of economic and healthcare and inheritance rights. I think most people get that now. And among other things, that was one of the benefits of Amendment 3 in Utah, was that we had an honest debate about what marriage meant, and that it wasn't just about a commitment between two people. It was also about Social Security checks and taxation and health insurance. And that denying marriage to gays and lesbians denies them many rights that people get simply by wandering down to the courthouse and getting a marriage certificate. Okay, so what happens? In 2004, the State Supreme Court of Massachusetts issued a ruling about gay marriage. A gay couple had sued under the state's anti-discrimination laws, and this is where it connects to other issues of civil rights. And there were two arguments that the plaintiffs made that the Supreme Court bought. The first, and I think this is very interesting, is that they argued that this was a violation of, there was a form of sex discrimination. Right, that arguing that being able to marry if you are one sex, only one other sex, was itself not just discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, but actual sex discrimination. The second was based on the 14th Amendment of the federal Constitution. Almost all states, in fact I think all states, have a similar clause. So the Massachusetts Constitution has a clause that gives, quote, equal protection of the laws to all citizens. So that was the second argument that the plaintiffs made, that denying marriage rights denied people equal protection of the laws because it made them different in the eyes of the law. Now, here's what's interesting. Various kinds of discrimination are actually legal under American law, under both federal and state law, but the government must show what's called a, quote, compelling state interest to do so. And in cases like gay marriage, that compelling state interest is usually listed either as the best interest of a child, so we don't want to let gay marriage happen because then there will be children in gay families and that's not in their best interest, or in certain southern states, simply that homosexuality is immoral and that the state has a compelling state interest in defining marriage as a way to discourage this kind of immorality or, maybe just take a stand on it. I don't know. Now, what's interesting is that if the person discriminated against falls into what's called a protected category, and those are the categories set up by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that is to say sex, race, and religion, then the courts must actually hold that kind of discrimination to a stricter scrutiny, which is to say if you don't fall into a protected category, and gays and lesbians do not, we are not covered by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, then it's easier to discriminate against you. Now, the Massachusetts court ruled that gay marriage should be extended to gays. They said they could find no compelling state interest that outweighed the obvious discrimination. Okay, so why did everybody else freak out? That's just Massachusetts. We know they're fruity liberals. We know what Massachusetts is about. So why does Utah care what Massachusetts is doing? Well, here's the thing. As it turns out, the United States is that. It's a group of states that are united. And to make things easier for people, every state has what's called a full faith and credit clause that says basically that they will recognize most legal contracts and relationships created in other states. Okay, so what that means is if Massachusetts is letting gays marry and gays move from Massachusetts to Utah, unlikely I know, but possible. If for some reason some poor gay person moves from Massachusetts to Utah with their little partner that they've married, then Utah might face they might face a challenge in court, arguing that this couple's marriage has to be recognized. That's why Massachusetts matters, because all marriages, and this is actually also true of adoption, are covered under full faith and credit, which means if you get married in California, your marriage will be recognized in Utah and in Montana and in New York State. So that's why everybody freaked out. And everybody, boy, did they freak out. 38 state legislatures have now banned gay marriage through state legislation. Another 26 state legislatures, and we fall into both of these categories, have also passed constitutional amendments to their state constitution banning gay marriage. Now, in 2004, Utah did that, right? So Utah, which had already said that gay marriage was illegal and that they would recognize it, decided that that wasn't enough, that they needed a state constitutional amendment. So they passed the state constitutional amendment, and they banned not only gay marriage, but actually what they called, quote, any marriage-like rights. And this was one of the nastier state constitutional amendments because it basically banned recognition of civil unions as well. Not only coming in from other states, which wouldn't be recognized anyway because civil unions are a state-by-state thing, but also it banned allowing civil unions in Utah. And perhaps, although we have not fought this one out in court yet, may have also banned basic contract rights for gays and lesbians. So for example, if I wanted to, I could make my mailman, actually it's a mail woman, I could make my mail deliverer my medical power of attorney. That is a basic right for me under contract law. It doesn't have anything to do with marriage. But under Utah's Amendment 3, those relationships, at least according to some interpretations, would not be allowed because they would extend marriage-like rights to people. Okay, so where are we all and why does this matter and why have I been invited here? Basically, we are moving backwards in civil rights, especially when it comes to family rights for gays and lesbians. These issues are profoundly issues of civil rights. Who your children get to call parent, what your rights to those children are, whether you can provide for them economically, whether you can provide health insurance for them. My partner, should I want to take a leave of absence, would not be able to provide health insurance for my child, despite the fact that my health insurance premiums go to support other people's families, heterosexual families and their children. And I gotta say, I don't have a problem with that. I just wish I wasn't paying into a system that I was actively banned from participating in myself. Which means my partner and I don't get to make the same kinds of decisions about child care that heterosexual families might get to make. Now there are a couple, so these laws are obviously and openly discriminatory, and as I've emphasized for you, they also cost us a lot of money, which I have to say really cheeses me off. It's annoying to see that every year on your taxes. So there are these profound economic costs. There are also ways in which there are parallels to other civil rights issues that are very interesting. So just to conclude, I want to mention a couple of these. And I want to be very careful to say that we cannot equate racial discrimination and discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. They are in many ways different issues. They certainly have a very different both historical incarnation and also a very different contemporary incarnation. They work differently. But there are some, to me, interesting parallels. The first is that one of the basic ways in which Anglo-Americans denied African Americans rights was to deny them family rights. So under American slavery, slave parents did not have control over their children and slaves could not get married. Now I'm not saying that's the same as what's happening to gays and lesbians today. What I'm saying is that denying people equal rights by denying them family rights, first of all, strikes at the heart of our most intimate relationships, but it also has a long and shameful history in America in racial discrimination. Now, of course, one of the differences is that gays and lesbians, if they are middle class and have money, can get around some of this. So I can name my partner guardian, and I can, well, what else can I do? There are a couple of other things we can do for my child. And we can, maybe take some time off and move to California if she can get another job and I have leave or whatever. But these ways that we can get around some of this are profoundly race and class, because race and class are linked in the United States. And so there are ways that middle class gays and lesbians, the majority of whom are white in the United States, can avoid some of these legal disabilities by paying a lot of money to lawyers. But of course, it also shows, again, the way that race and class distribute certain rights in the United States. Under segregation, many southern states banned interracial marriage, and this to me is another parallel, and removed white children, not black children, you're not worried about that, removed white children from homes in which one of their parents engaged in an interracial relationship. So again, this issue of white supremacy and family has a long tradition in the United States, and it's a tradition that did not end that ended quite recently. So for example, interracial marriage was finally allowed to occur in the South under a 1967 Supreme Court case. So until 1967, it was legal to ban interracial marriage. It was a case ironically called Loving v. Virginia, where the Supreme Court said, you know what, we're not going to put up with this anymore. This is a form of white supremacy, and states may no longer ban interracial marriages. Again, the law is used in a discriminatory fashion to support white supremacy and to define which families will be recognized before the law and which will not. Finally, and for me this is the most interesting parallel, gays and lesbian citizens today, similar to African Americans under both slavery and segregation, literally live under different laws in different states. So if I moved to California, me and my family would have very different legal rights than living here in Utah, just as African Americans from the South gained legal rights when they moved to Chicago or New York or Los Angeles to take advantages of jobs in the war industries in the 19-teens and the 1940s. So it's very interesting to me that you're now seeing a patchwork of laws that basically means that different people who are all citizens of the United States have different rights based on where they lived. Now, all of that aside, I do want to say one other thing about the history of gays and lesbians and civil rights in the United States, which is we are going backwards right now. That is true. But we have gone far further, in my opinion, and I say this as a historian who teaches the history of sexuality, in progress on gay and lesbian rights in the last 30 years than we have in progress on issues of race or issues of social class. So these are very important issues, but they cannot distract us from the fact that we actually have been able to make many strides in gay and lesbian rights. And not all of those strides have been duplicated in issues of social class or issues of race, civil rights, and race relations. Thank you.
Hopefully this mic works. Can everybody hear me? Great, because I'm going to take a little privilege and sit down. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I'm real thankful to be on this panel, and it also comes with a degree of difficulty to talk about issues of race, racism, discrimination, and also when we're celebrating Dr. King. As Christy kind of asked us to do, to look at the research that we do and talk about that, I kind of scratched and scrapped my presentation today. So I'm kind of go off the cuff, free flow a little bit, and just try to talk about the issues that I researched. One of the questions was this issue of treading water. And as I thought about this, my response really is that yes, we're treading water, but there's, for many of us, a scuba diver below water level pulling at the legs of white women, of language minorities, of economically disadvantaged people, people of color, and immigrants. And then when some of us drown, institutions like this say they can't swim. So for me, the issue of treading water is more than just, can a person swim? Are you allowing us to be able to swim at the speed and the rate and with the free ability to finish that race like everybody else? And for people of color and other disadvantaged groups, it's a resounding no, right? My research basically focused on what I call racial battle fatigue. And racial battle fatigue is that kind of psychological, physiological, emotional response to dealing with racism every day. And for the reason why I chose to just kind of scratch my presentation is when I looked around the room and I saw the diversity, this doesn't look like Utah. So either there's a lot of extra credit assignments out there. I don't know if these are college students or high school students, but this room just changed the whole flow of my presentation. I thought I was going to talk to a different group of people, but I'm totally glad to see the people here show up. So, Professor Land talked about Dr. King dying 39 years ago. For me, that means two different things. One, we lost a great leader who sacrificed his life for the benefit of all people. Economically disadvantaged people, people of color, women, and others. But also for me, it strikes home a little more personal because my father, for many people know here at the University of Utah, at least those people I work with, my father was on the security team for Dr. King. So until his assassination, then became chief of security for Reverend Jesse Jackson during Operation Breadbasket, then later Operation Push. And as Dr. King and then Dr. Jackson, or Reverend Jackson, were on the road, so was my father. So that was a pull away from my household. So prior to my parents divorcing, I hardly got to see my father, right? So there's a little emotional things, but I realized later in life that sometimes an individual has to sacrifice her or his life for others to benefit, right? And so, but what I don't appreciate in institutions like this is that too many people are sacrificing their lives unnecessarily. We've heard on immigration issues, we've heard on voting rights issues, we've heard issues dealing with LGBTQ, and many of those people who come to institutions like the University of Utah, and I'm not just picking on this institution, it could be UCLA, it could be University of Michigan, it could be Professor Land School, University of Illinois, all have to struggle unnecessarily. And it's really important to have people like Dr. Dace, and we are losing a great person because she has insight and feel and can touch the pulse of those disadvantaged and oppressed communities to try to offer relief. But that's not enough. just one person trying to carry the weight of an institution's response. We're living in a post-Brown, post-civil rights era. What Brown did for us was to remove legal barriers of segregation. It removed Jim Crow laws. It removed separate and really unequal. But it did not change the attitudes and racial ideologies that people bring to campus, right? And that's what we're dealing with in schools like this, campus climate, racial ideologies, people seeing somebody as less than. Time after time, semester after semester, I see students, and not just students, staff and faculty of color who are stressed out. I see stressed people. People who almost are wanting to give up hope, but they're holding on because they know their presence here is going to make life better, not just for them, but for other people who follow behind them. But what happens when you drain the resources of people on a daily basis? I told my student, my class met yesterday for the first time, and I typically give an opening kind of presentation about my background. And one of the things I talk about is just in my first semester here. I've been here 7 years now. When I got here, I'm from Chicago. The mountains are beautiful, the weather is beautiful. You don't have really wind chill, so you don't know what that's about. And wind chill, we don't have too much racism in the winter in Chicago because it's too cold outside. But the wind chill can cut you deep, right? And the humidity can just weigh you down. And that's what racism and sexism and homophobia is like. It's like the wind chill factor. So here in Utah, when the weather is 40 degrees, it means something totally different in Chicago when you add the wind chill factor in, and that's racism. And oftentimes people are measuring what people go through on the true temperature, and they don't factor in the wind chill. Students of color on this campus have to face that. When they don't have the appropriate coping strategies to move through these institutions, or they're not in CESA, or they're not tied to a particular group, or they don't touch the hands and hear the voice of faculty of color, they tend to struggle. Not that they're ill-equipped. We know that some of the most well-equipped students of color who come to these institutions are actually had better grades in high school than some of their white students or their white colleagues, right? But they get here, and that wind chill factor of racism, sexism, homophobia hurts them. And that's what they have to struggle with. So has civil rights been postponed? Yes and no. We see a huge range of diversity. Is it enough? No. I'll just take two. So he doesn't have tenure yet. Watch it. Neither do I yet. So we've seen Chad votes before, so let's hold out on that. But what I want to say in conclusion, and I'll open up for questions and answers afterwards, is that what we need to do is to really examine these institutions and really do a wholesale, comprehensive study of campus climate that touches multiple identities, not just race in general, but race by gender by sexuality, race by gender by sexuality by class. People get so hung up looking at one comprehensive group that they really can't tell anything. Then if they slice it by gender, then they say, okay, there's inequities. But what happens with inequities in that, right? So for institutions to respond to Dr. King's call, we have to respond to the needs and look at what specific group struggles are in institutions that don't respond to them fairly. Okay? And I'll leave it with that.
Thanks to everybody on the panel for their contributions. In lieu of time, I think we have maybe 15 minutes or so. I will suspend my little stroke I have before they wrap things up and just open up the questions and answers from the audience so we can hear what you guys have to say or ask. Questions? Yes.
sure. I think the U.S. has always benefited from that. It's not an accident that governments and countries south of the border have been destabilized. I don't always admit to this, but when I graduated from college, I worked for the Central Intelligence Agency for about a year and a half. I was part of a minority recruitment program. I was from South Texas. I worked at the headquarters, and so the history of that agency is not very good in places like Nicaragua and Salvador, different places in South America, Central America, where it's to our benefit to have puppet regimes, to have military dictators doing what we need. So I think the conditions and the history of this country has always been benefited from issues like that. Nobody gets scared. I'm not on the payroll anymore.
No more questions.
This is also for Dr. Ricky Hellman, and it's on the topic of, you mentioned that some kids that are U.S. citizens because they were born here and their parents are actually illegal immigrants, that they're getting treated disfavorably just because of their parents. What in that situation do you think should be done? If the parents are illegal and the kids are illegal, do you think they should be separated? Do you think they should both be treated as illegal, or do you think they should both be treated as legal?
I think we should have a conversation about what illegal is. I think we should, and the concepts and those definitions. I mean, coming to this country, you speak to families. People don't really want to come here. You know, people are coming here because they're forced to come here. It's either starve and not have a job and not have the opportunities that I have, or come here, take the chance of walking across the desert because of our immigration border patrol policy that we've set up. We're forcing people more and more into the desert, more and more, into dangerous situations. And so I think the question more is about how do we have conversations about what does it mean to be legal? Is that a fair assessment of what people are doing and what people are? I don't personally believe that anybody's illegal. I think people come here because they're doing it out of survival instincts. Speak to a lot of families, they'd rather go home. They don't particularly like the U.S. culture, the U.S. customs, but they're here. Their families are being raised here. They're contributing to this country in many, many ways. And I think, the fact that we're labeling them, the media labels them, the government labels them that way, a lot of people label them that way, and it's done in a way that's putting their power over people like that. And so that's kind of the way I would answer that question on whether they're illegals or should we separate. Obviously, we shouldn't separate families, and that's one of the justifications of that one article that I read you, that a lot of the families are being put in there because the government's saying, well, that's good. We should keep them together. So let's keep them all in jail. Let's keep them all in detention centers. That's how convoluted this whole discussion has gotten to be.
Regarding the immigration issue, you mentioned that the media has framed immigration or immigrants in a criminal way, and I was just interested in what your comments on the way education frames such things as immigration, race, so on and so forth.
Is that for my? How immigration frames, or how education frames immigration issues? That is my main area of expertise, and in looking at some of what I've been doing a lot of work on is achievement gaps. You might hear a lot about that in regards to No Child Left Behind, especially in K-12. But the way I've been looking at it is to look at how the educational systems, not only in K-12, but in higher education also, don't serve the interests of students of color, and my focus obviously is on Latinos and Chicanos. And so the way the educational system has framed it is to really, here in Utah anyway, is to look at all Latinos as undocumented kids or having limited English proficiency. When in fact, if you look at the numbers of kids in the K-12 system here in Utah, the majority of kids in schools here that are Latino are U.S.-born citizens. But the way the debate is being framed, or if you listen to people up at the Hill, this is an immigration problem. The system's being overrun by illegal kids, and why should we pay for those kids, is the way it's being framed, even within education circles. And so again, I think we need to turn it on its head and say, first of all, the majority of kids that are in our schools, they're U.S.-born kids. Second of all, even if they are undocumented, the kids are here, the kids are going to stay, the kids should have opportunities to go to higher ed if they want. Their parents are generating income, and they're generating tax revenue that's being pumped back into the schools, even though Utah is last in the nation in per pupil funding. We're last in the nation in class size. But see, those issues of funding and class size are now being thrown on all the illegals that are coming here. And so I think even in education circles, it's a very big problem, and we need to continue to reframe the debate on what illegal is. We need to continue to frame the debate on what achievement gaps are. And it takes a lot of effort, not only at the scholarly or the research institution level, but in the schools and in the communities.
Can I say something too? I also think, just in terms of education and education and immigration, I think it's also very useful to understand the history of immigration and immigration reform in the United States. The regulation of immigration in the United States is a relatively new phenomenon. I'm an Irish Catholic. My family came in the 19th century. Nobody who was already here wanted us here. The only reason we got in was because they weren't regulating immigration in the first place. So I think this sort of idea of legal and illegal and immigrant versus native born, to me, feels very artificial. Because like a lot of other issues related to social class and race in the United States, we're not playing on the same playing field. Right? My family staggered off a boat as a result of the Irish potato famine and didn't get any further than southern Manhattan because we didn't have any money. And then we stayed there for 100 years. And eventually we made it out. But, nobody liked us. Nobody wanted us here. No Irish need apply. And so we were not U.S. citizens because the previous U.S. citizens thought that having Irish in America was a good idea. We were here because nobody could stop us. And it's not until 1924 that the United States begins to significantly restrict immigration, and it does so deliberately on the basis of race and ethnicity. Right, so the 1924 Immigration Act targets actually mostly Eastern Europeans and Southern Europeans, so we don't want any more Italians and Jews. Then it outright bans most of Asia and in fact most of what we would call the Middle East. And what's interesting to me about that is we still didn't ban migration from the Western Hemisphere. So we still had large numbers of people coming from South and Central America and large numbers of people coming from the West Indies, actually, into the United States because American capital needed workers and they did not want to cut off that source of cheap labor. So it is not actually until 1965 that the Western Hemisphere falls under immigration regulation in the way that the rest of the world does. And so to me, not only is the distinction between illegal and legal kind of a spurious distinction, but honestly, the sort of idea that some people made it here on their own and that everybody, that all immigrants are equal and that they all start down at the bottom is not true either. We have made it much more difficult for certain groups of immigrants in the United States at different times, and we have treated them differently, and a lot of that has been on the basis of race.
I think it was interesting that you said that your family, their reaction to immigration now is that it's a problem and something needs to be done. And I find that same attitude in my family. We're Japanese immigrants. But do you have any sense of what the issues are that are driving that, like kind of close the door behind me attitude that a lot of recent immigrants have?
If you know the answer to that, then yeah. I don't know. It's very disconcerting to have those conversations, but it's important that we continue to have them with our family. I think, for especially our experience, I didn't come from anywhere. I'm from here. And so I find it insulting when people say, where are you from? They're not really saying, are you from Texas or are you from Utah? They're really saying, what country are you from? And whereas,
where are you from?
Right. Whereas, we have family, my wife and my family, the line crossed us, we didn't cross the line, that supposed border line, okay? And so I think a lot of it has to do with history, and I think a lot of it has to do with our families don't know our own history. We forget once we make it to a certain level, I'm not saying everybody, I'm saying the people in my family, people I've talked to, we begin to internalize that hate and the overall fear that's going out there that permeates the society. And so I think a lot of it has to do with educating ourselves and being very critical and having a critical understanding of the history of this country and the history of our people. And the reason it doesn't happen is because it's not in the schools. You don't have Chicano studies programs in the high schools, in the elementary schools, in the middle schools. We don't have an understanding of Japanese internment here in the state of Utah. It's not covered in Utah History Month. And my son just went through it in 4th grade. He had Utah history. That, you can all pretty much guess what it was. There's no discussion of Native American, Pacific Islander, Asian American, Latinos here in the state. And so part of it is our fault, our communities, we're not being critical and asking those questions. Part of it is the system is not set up to do that. And so it's imperative that we continue to push ourselves and addressing those issues of race and history and putting it at the forefront so that we don't start doing it to ourselves the way it's happening a lot.
I was wondering, this is your question, how is the United States and its immigration policy unique in comparison to other countries? And I was wondering if any of the towns had anything particular on that. And then the second part of the question is how would each rate our immigration policies and our social justice in comparison to other countries like this? Financially, like this.
I'm not an immigration. I'm just trying to worry about educational research. But if you
Sure. Again, I'm also not an immigration specialist. The United States has actually, how do I put this? We have a history of much more open immigration policy than other Western European nations. But we also wanted to be like those Western European nations, and one of the best ways to do that was to ban immigration from other parts of the world that we didn't want people coming from. But it is also true that our citizenship laws are, and I think actually that's really the answer, our citizenship laws can be quite open. So for example, if you're of Turkish descent and you're born in Germany, you are not automatically a German citizen. And in that way, the United States actually has more generous citizenship provisions. That doesn't mean it treats its immigrants better, but it does mean that our rules for citizenship are no longer based on race or ethnicity, and that if you are born here, you have the rights of a citizen here. The United States also takes more refugees than any other country in the world. And it is part both of our sort of broader commitment to human rights, although you could also say cynically that it's also part of American foreign policy. So we take refugees from countries or areas that that have regimes that we don't like, and we don't take them from areas that have regimes that we do like. However, if you look at immigration as a social class issue as well, in that many immigrants who come to the United States, legal or illegal, start out at a disadvantage economically, we offer far fewer social and economic benefits, well, to pretty much anybody, but especially to our immigrants, than do anybody else. So, for example, refugees from the crisis in the former Yugoslavia who ended up in Germany had far better economic and social support and access to a much better social welfare system than immigrants who came here. Or than refugees that came here. Right now, we give our refugees 9 months of rental and economic support, and we give them some English training and some job training, and then they're on their own. And what's amazing about that is that these people are refugees, right? They've been like totally traumatized and horrible things have happened to them and their family, and that's why they're here. And 9 months seems to me to be pretty stingy. However, on the other hand, we don't give our own poor people that. So it's one of these things where I personally don't even know what to do or what to think in that regard.
Okay, I want to add my 2 cents as an immigrant myself, who teach some courses on immigration issues. So I would say that a lot of issues we talk about, civil rights issues today, are actually historical issues. They were the legacies of our historical a history of discrimination and exclusion of people of color in particular. And here we remind ourselves that we are a liberal democracy, where government founded on the principles of limited. The smaller the government, the better. And therefore, the less of the regulation, the better, ideally. And we are also a capitalist society, and therefore we want to make as much money as possible. And when you combine the two together, we have a very selective immigration policy, even though on paper we also have the most liberal immigration policy today, I believe, particularly in the Western democracies. So particularly I'm an Asian immigrant myself, so I can also tell that even if, yes, we do have the system that doesn't give too much support to newcomers, particularly those who are mostly in need, such as refugee populations from all over the world. I can also say most of the Asian American immigrants today are actually selected to come themselves. They are not the economic refugees or political refugees in any sense. So they are voluntary immigrants, and they're coming here, they're proud of their being not to need governmental assistance, or even if they need it, particularly many of our Southeast Asian refugee population, when they need a lot of mental health support, they didn't seek governmental support for it because they are proud of their being self-dependent. So there are many angles to the issues of immigration and how we treat immigrants and how government policies and support for the immigrants. And apparently we cannot paint it in one stroke, and we are definitely the most immigrant nation today, and we are immigrants of all sorts, of all kinds, for all reasons, and of all class background, and all kinds of other kinds of social attributes. And therefore, the question you ask is really big, and I can only just a little part answer it in my own way.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have come to the conclusion of our panel. So please give us that round of applause.